we record everything, and they're linked on the website. They're uploaded to a YouTube channel or a Google Drive, depending. And usually within about a day or two, they become live. And a lot of people register but can't make a particular program, so being recorded really helps. It's also a good memory aid. Tonight we're going to talk about tools with edges, which means I want to try to stay focused on that because there are a lot of tools without edges. Gloves and mallets and power carving tools and burrs and dust collection systems and lights and work holders and benches and all kind of things that consume money. But tonight I want to see if we can focus on things with edges. The May program is in a month, and the topic of that is making comfort animals and things. And there's a lot of activity going on with a fair number of people making a variety of things. It started with comfort birds, which was Roger's suggestion on what we do for Gathering of the Guilds. And we're going to have a lot of comfort birds of various kinds and various woods, but it's also comfort tortoises and slugs and tadpoles and something else that just got held up. So it's the generic thing is comfort things, and this has been going on for a long time. I had a fascinating interview with a woman in Schenectady, New York, that's been running the Comfort Things project for her club for 7 years. They made about 500, and they do it in a way that we haven't done, but she's sharing some really interesting experience. So it'll be quite a good, both conceptual and hands-on program. We're going to take off for the summer. There are going to be no programs in June, July. We'll do a picnic in August. We did one last year in my backyard. This year it's going to be in Jim Spitzer's backyard in the general Beaverton area. We'll get promotion out of that, but we'll take a break. We'll probably try to do some carving things in the summer as opposed to program things. So that should help. I want to put a plug in for Gathering of the Guild, which is coming up the first weekend in May. We need help with volunteers. We have a lot of volunteers. I'm really happy actually with the state of the volunteering that's going on. We have an online mechanism to sign up called Sign Up Genius that the Guild of Oregon Woodworkers has pioneered and used. We need help on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for booth volunteers. And these are people that basically will support a store that we've created. There's going to be about 150 to 175 carvings for sale. And it's a large booth. We need help with that. Some really quite exotic and some quite practical things. But give me a call or send me an email and I'll send you a link. We really need help with that. The California Carvers Guild uses the word broken blade to designate someone who has passed away. And it was sad a week ago, for those of us that know Jim Hall, he passed away on Sunday of a week ago. And he was a great friend of everybody's in the Guild of Oregon Woodworkers, the Turner's Group, and the Carving Group. And he will be dearly missed. He was a particularly important sharer and encourager of a lot of people. So we will have a memorial for him in the newsletter that's coming out in a couple of weeks. And we have quite a large photo archive that he helped me put together in the last year. And so that's things. So tonight is both as a combination of presentations and conversations. And what you're going to find is people have opinions and their experience is different. And some people will say they like such and such and some they don't. So be prepared. And that's just the way it goes. For those of you that are trying to build up a set of tools, this is to aid you. For those of us that have some tools, we can always figure out what we need more. I'll talk a bit about the sponsors. We have Rockler and Woodcraft and Woodcrafters. and they're really important for us to buy locally. They're convenient. They usually are price competitive. Usually they have stuff in stock, not always, but it's really, it's to our benefit and their benefit. If they succeed, we succeed, and vice versa. So we should be doing our best to do that. The reality is we buy mail order and we buy used, and we buy things and we make things and we remake things. So there's lots of alternatives. But we do have, I think we're really lucky to live in one of the great forests of the United States, and with a 100-year history of things that are going on here. So I'd like to do that. The general, Terry's going to start with a presentation on knives. Some carvers don't use knives. A lot of carvers use mainly knives, and knives are one of these foundational things. It's not just what scouts use when they grow up, or just that whittlers use. They become an important part. Max Sutter, in the kit of tools that he had, of 6 tools that he provided in his introductory relief carving class, one of the 6 was a knife. And so Terry will lead up about that, but we'll obviously talk about gouges. Tom Sipe is going to spend a few minutes talking about axes and adzes and things that, are on the other end of the spectrum. And we're going to talk about buying used, buying new, making them, remaking them, having them custom made. George Blackman is here from Redmond, and he has made stuff for us, and he's able to make stuff for you. So I'm sure he'll talk about that. The analogy with buying carving stuff is like someone comes up to you and said, I decided to be a fisherman in my retirement. Can you tell me what I should buy? And what do you ask them, right? Are you going to go deep sea fishing or fly fishing? Are you going to be in a lake or in a river, and yada, yada, right? Are you going to be a commercial or private and hobbyist? Is it once a year or once a week? So the whole carving spectrum kind of ends up in that same thing. And I suspect a lot of the first questions we should ask when you ask them what they like best is, well, what do you make? And so it's obviously situational dependence. We have a really unbelievable tool library. I use that word. Will someday be an actual physical library that we will be able to check things out, rent things out from. The Guild of Oregon Woodworkers, about 5 years ago when Chuck started his classes, bought out 2 estates, one from Redmond, one from Portland. And we created 8 loaner kits that were rented for his classes for a couple of months. And Max Sutter donated, I think, 7 or 8 of his kits that have been all over the Western United States now actively for the last 2 years. Another guy in Camas, his dad bequeathed him a set of 60 tools that he donated to the Carving Guild that we own. And they were assembled in 1925 when his father was an apprentice in Berlin, and he inherited the tools from his dad, who died in World War I. So we now have and Max Sutter's estate donated over 500 tools. So we're swimming in tools, which is both a good news and bad news. The bad news is they need to be sharpened and they need to be maintained, and that's a lot of work. But the essence here in this conversation is that they give you a chance to try things out before you buy them, or at least try some things out. So just be aware of that. So Terry, I'm going to call on you first, and then Chuck. Till my laptop failed on me, I edited down the video that we did. Chuck and I had a Zoom interview, and I edited it down to 10 minutes of what I consider to be the pithy things that he had. But we'll put him on the spot and talk about his experiences, because he's shared a lot of that in the classes that we've taken. Okay, so Terry, are you ready? I will.
Yes, certainly. Always ready.
I will spotlight you, and we will get going.
Okay. I'm going to talk a little about knives, and I like to carve with knives. Started as a whittler, I guess you could say, camping and hiking over 30 years ago. And a good knife can do a lot of things. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Let me switch my camera real quick. There we go. Now all you see is my hands. Boy, that lighting's too good. How did my hands get so old? All right. So I want to talk about the kind of knives you might, and I did, pick for carving. I have kind of a core carving group of knives, a rough out knife, and I'm going to do this, practice what I preach. And a rough out knife is just a big, robust knife with a pretty good length blade that'll take out decent sized pieces of wood. In this core set of knives, and this is what I use for just about every carve. I have these that I make on medium size things, anything other than really large work. The rough out knife and two detail knives, a very small detail knife with a straight edge. And it is, because of its length, it's not very flexible. So I also have a detail knife that has a very thin blade, but it is flexible because of its length. And I can actually bend that into a cut, change shape a little bit. Those three knives are ones that I use in my shop when I can. My core set of knives. By the way, if anybody has a question, maybe pop it in the chat, and hopefully I'll recognize it, or just shout out. I want to talk a little bit too about some specialty knives. Those, by the way, are all Helvey knives. Helvey's hard to get right now. They're very popular, but when they're available, they've kept the price down between, say $40 and $45 per knife, pretty much, when they're available. I think they even have a thing on their site now that says, please don't order more than 2 knives at a time for any customer. You won't get them. Basically, it's not quite that blunt, I guess. This is just a chip carving knife, and I'm not a chip carver, but I do use a chip carving knife for a couple of things. I found that there are many cases where you need to do something like a chip in the middle of a carving. Say when you're carving around the end of the wings of the nose. That's a nice place for a chip knife, for example. And I also use them for outlining lines on a carving when I start. Kind of like this thing, to get a nice deep line cut in. So, chip knife. I think that's from FlexCut, and it was about 25 bucks, maybe. This is one of my favorite backup knives. Occasionally I'll find a really odd place. You'll notice it doesn't have a straight edge. It's got a curved edge like a scimitar. And it's also very flexible. This is a handmade knife that I got as a gift many years ago. It was made by Tom Wolfe. So it's a bit of a collector's item now. Even has his initials on it. But it's a great detail knife. Get nice little pieces of wood out, and it's even though the point is sharp, it's almost, if you look at it under a magnifying glass, you'll almost see it's a little rounded on the end, which is a good thing. Now here's another specialty knife that I love. This is by Gil Drake, by the way. Unfortunately, Gil is temporarily closed down the online store. Hopefully he'll be back again soon. But when you can get this is about maybe $40 to $50 knife, depending on the source. Usually that's straight from Gill. It's used to cut cottonwood bark. Cottonwood bark is very soft wood. This is a piece of cottonwood bark, and it's in layers. So you need something with this kind of soft wood that has a very rounded, notice the way the end of the blade is shaped. It's completely rounded, almost like a butter knife. But even though it's rounded, the edge goes up and around the knife. Well, the reason that is rounded that way is so that the point, a normal knife would be pointed, right, on the end, so that the point doesn't dig into the wood and you don't have severe rip outs. Specialty knife for cottonwood bark, very, very good for carving cottonwood bark. Okay. An odd specialty knife. This is the first left-hand, I'm left-handed, by the way. This is the first left-hander's knife that I've ever bought. It's a hook knife. And because it's left-handed, the sharp edge and the bevel's on the outside of the curve, and the sharp edge is on the right-hand side of the knife when you're holding it up. Therefore, you can pull or drag across, pull to you with your left hand. I don't know, most knives are made, like most tools are made for right-handed people. And I just decided I would treat myself and get a left-handed tool. So that's a hook knife used for things like bowls and small spoons to hollow out the interior. Who is that from? I think the manufacturer is Maracnid, and it's about $25 or $30. Now, I guess if you had one knife and you were a purist, a carver, a whittler, or a flat plane carver, this would be the knife you might pick. This is a Schleud knife. Schleud is a Swedish word that means craft, among other things. So it is a craft knife. And it's a good general purpose carving tool. And if you're only going to use a knife, this might be the knife that you would pick. One of these days, just to, I don't know, to hone my own skills, I think I'm going to try true flat plane carving with just a knife and see if I can actually do it. Finish up these knives with two very small micro knives from Dockyard, I believe is the manufacturer. And if you really, really have some, and I do occasionally because I carve small animals in the round. If you really have some very small details that you need to get to, these two knives might be what you would pick. They're the devil sharpen though, because the blades are so small. All right, now those are kind of, I do have a bunch more knives, but those are the knives that I might generally use, would generally use, and some of them I use for odd things, except when I travel. When I travel, I have I might take this knife. It's a carving jack, is what it's called, from FlexCut. And you can get right or left-hand versions because it's got squirt tools on it, angle tools. The tool itself is bent at a right angle. It's about, $90 to $110, $115, and it's from FlexCut. It's a nice general purpose, kind of a Swiss Army knife for carvers, if you will. Chisel blade, rough out blade, a few gouges of different profiles of E-tool. And this knife I've carried with me hiking for ages. And if I sit down for more than 15 or 20 minutes and there's a stick around, I'll probably carve something in it. And if I do, I'll probably use this knife. That's a case knife, by the way. It's about, I don't know, $40, $50 now, maybe. And this is a 3-bladed carving knife with from Buck. Nice, another nice little whittling knife, a little bit bigger, a little more robust for larger things. And I'm almost done, rounding on home. This is a interchangeable blade knife from Warren Tools. And I carry this when I have a little bit more, the ability to carry a little bit more in my traveling tool bag. The blades aren't really that great. They do sharpen well. It's held up. I've had this for over 20 years and have resharpened the blades many times. But it's a nice assortment of blades. It's light. And if you don't really need a rugged knife, it's very good for details, and it's very compact. The handle and the blades are interchangeable. So those are some of my knives, and I would say that probably I use these knives about 95% of the time. If something bad happens and one of my good knives is temporarily out of commission because I've messed up the edge, I do have some other backup knives of just about all varieties that I can use.
Terry, there are a couple questions.
All righty.
So Roger asked, what's the benefit of a knife blade that can flex?
Occasionally, let's see if I can, let me switch back over. Occasionally you need to because of the natural curvature of whatever it is you're working on, you need to actually bend the knife to fit into that form, whatever it is you're carving. And if you have a flexible blade, you can do that. What I just did, it was hard to see, but I actually bent the blade, and it is, it's not a brittle knife. It's a fairly flexible knife. It's still got a nice sharp edge, but that way I can move. One thing you do with it, I can move the knife across the surface of the wood and cover a little bit bigger surface. So
Okay.
that is the purpose of a bendy knife.
And then Diane asked the question, was as you were talking about the bark knife from Gil Drake, what's the name of that tool? Is there a name that you can remember?
Well, yeah, I believe it was just called a cottonwood bark knife. I think, and I found it when his site was open. I just checked today. I was going to check current prices, but his site is down, and he sells most of the stuff directly, so you don't see a lot of Gil Drake knives around. Cottonwood bark knife, I believe, is what it's called. I think.
Okay.
Yep.
And then Roman made a comment. Roman, maybe you can make a comment. I think you said you completely agree, and I think that's when you were talking about the Schloid knife or the Mora knife. Is that accurate? So Terry, I'll have you stop sharing, maybe.
Yes, exactly. That Mora knife is great. I use it all the time. I would highly recommend it. It's kind of a laminated blade, very high quality blade, keeps the edge sharp for a long time. I agree. It's a great knife.
Yeah. One of the beginning carvers had a Mora knife in the class within the last month, and she took a project home and was working on it. And the Mora knife that I have and the one that's common she has, it has a plastic sheath in it and it slipped out. And guess what happened? It wasn't pleasant. It sliced her little finger on the way out, on the way down. And she stopped the bleeding. She said it was a little bit more than usual, but the next morning she couldn't actually bend her finger and she had severed a tendon in her little finger, which required orthopedic and fracture clinic to suture it together and 6 weeks of occupational therapy. So there's a, we're dealing with very sharp objects. And I never give two thoughts to that plastic sheath, except I did notice it wasn't very sturdy. It wasn't very holding very well sometimes.
It's not the fault of the knife. I agree. Sheath may be not ideal. When we are talking about the knife quality is great. How people handle the knife is a different topic.
Right. That's exactly right.
It's unlike Roman, unlike a lot of these carving knives, this is a moderate to small length for this particular type knife. But these were pretty good sized working knives as well as hobby knives when flat plane carving, and that's what they were used for primarily originally in Sweden and Scandinavia, other Scandinavian countries. So it was a pretty good sized blade because it was a working blade too, ages ago. So you have to handle it a little differently. Notice this is a typical rough out knife. See the difference in the size of the blades. This rough out knife is one of the biggest knives I have. Other than this is this can be a beast. So you have to be careful with it. And I'd say if you're going to carve flat plane carving, and that's usually caricature in around kind of stuff, you really need to wear a glove on your offhand if you're using this kind of knife.
Yes, so that blade is 2.25 inches length.
Yep. And this is actually one of not the biggest of these knives. They have several sizes, and this is actually the smaller one, I believe. So, yeah.
Okay, let's, Terry, I'm just going to pause and let's ask if there are any questions or any comments, observations, favorites, your own experience with knives.
I have a question about Swiss knives. When I buy books and read articles on web, I see pictures when people use a Swiss knives. I understand it's stainless steel knives, not high carbon steel. And I wonder what other people have experienced, and maybe Terry, what experience they have with Swiss kind of knives.
You're talking about the Swiss Army knife, the red-handled one? Yeah.
Victorinox. Yeah, I was going to show one of those too, because I use that for a special purpose. You can really get those because the metal is thin. It is sharpened fairly easily and keeps the edge for a while. I use them to make very thin slices. It's on a subject. I'm carving little birds from twigs. You make these slices to make the feathers, the tail feathers of the bird. And I use that small Swiss Army knife, Victorinox knife to make those cuts. They're incredibly sharp. Yeah, that was I think that was a central prop in a movie long ago about a serial killer called Dressed to Kill. Was a Swiss Army knife. You got that thing razor sharp.
Okay, so Terry, Diane asked if you could list all the knives in a document with the brand names, please. Is that related to your video, or is that something you could add?
Yes, and yes. How would, well, we can talk about how to get it out later on, but yes, I can do that. In fact, I've
Yeah.
got most of it typed already in a little outline. I tried to
I-
follow the sequence.
Because Terry is also the webmaster, we've been accumulating things on the website under the resources tab, under tutorials. That's where the stropping video and white paper is. So, that would be a nice parking place, would be one. But I'd say for this purpose, we can send it out to those that are registered, Terry, just to get it out.
And we
Okay.
could also make an article in the newsletter. Send me
Yeah.
pictures of them and I'll put it together.
And Tom, I'm spotlighting you. You've got your knives and your workstation. So
Yeah.
you want to comment on those?
I wanted to illustrate, there are two different sizes of the Sloyd knife. But this is the one that I use the most. And I found that putting a notch in it, the way I use the knife, makes it very comfortable to use and it does not slip. So I haven't seen anybody else do that, but that's what I like to do.
Thank you. And those of us that know Roman know that he's a expert, experienced person on chip carving, and has shown us various knives. Do you want any comments about chip carving knives for us, Roman?
Give me a few minutes. I will
Yeah.
find a few.
We'll come back. Okay. Anybody else have questions or experiences? Yeah, George.
I'd like to make a comment about stainless steel. My background is in maybe 70 years of wood carving, but then I'm a retired welder, and since then I've become a blacksmith and learned a bit about alloys. We have no advantage in using stainless steel blades because we usually take care of the tools and they don't rust. And stainless steel traditionally does not have as high a carbon as simple high carbon steels that take a really, really fine edge. So if you have a choice and you want really sharp knives, go for the high carbon steel.
Thanks. I belong to a couple of other clubs just because I learned from them as well. One of them is in Central California, and the president of that club makes his own knives. He has made about 35, and he demonstrates and has a program on how to do that. He makes a lot of them, specialty knives, out of repurposed jigsaw blades. The blade is not tempered all the way through, just the teeth, but he files the teeth off, and there's enough left that he can actually get a blade out of it and then make his own handle. And he does some special purpose carving. So he's got one that's got a longer blade that he can fit in, but he enjoys helping people do that. We had a class on making your own knives with a guy named Kit Camp, who is one of the 3 woodworking teachers at Catlin Gable School in Portland. And he did a 4-hour seminar at the Guild of Oregon Woodworkers, and we each got to make a knife. And we gave us a bar of steel from Amazon. We cut it up and we ground it on a sander, and we hardened, tempered it, and we made a handle for it, and we learned how to do that. And so that's a whole nother spectrum for those that want to go down that path. Yeah, George.
We could do that again here for those who want to travel to Central Oregon. I have a full blacksmith shop. I also make carving knives of saw blades, and it's pretty good steel. It's not as good as you can buy, but it's functional, and you can have any shape you want, and we can just make a handle for it.
Yeah, thanks. That would be a great adventure. I also want to point out Adam McIsaac in the North Vancouver La Center area. He was our speaker last month. He grew up in Northwest Coastal Indian carving. And if you remember those of you that on the presentation, he said real carvers make their own knives. make their real carvers make their own tools. And when he was apprenticed to a master, the guys gave him cursory instructions, a piece of steel, and said, go make your own knife and carve this with it and come back when you're done. And that was his entry into being apprenticed by this guy. If he couldn't make his own knife and make something and carve something with it, he wasn't going to take him as a student. So Adam is also teaching classes, making crooked knives and adzes and various kinds of things. So as a result of the program last month, I think what will happen this summer is that we will do a workshop at his place in the center, and you'll have an opportunity to make something. You know, he would love to have serious students make a knife and a crooked knife and an adze. Can't do that in one weekend. So that's a possibility as well. Mr. Menges, you had somebody had their hand up. Was that?
Yes,
No,
I did, but
yeah.
I looked back through the chat and I wanted to know what was in the kits that you'd been talking about before. I'm a beginning carver. And I have a few pieces, but I want to know where to go from just having a flex cut knife and a couple of V-cut, tiny V-cuts.
Yeah.
So what's in the kits may be helpful.
I will get that out and I will respond. The ultimate question first, though, is what do you want to make, right? Mary May has her recommended list. And when Chuck was putting his program together here, we came up with a set of 12 tools. So that's a list. It's overlapped with Mary May. And Chuck, I'll kind of cue you up in a minute because I'll call on you next to talk about the tools. I asked Chuck what his favorite tool was, and Mary May has asked what her favorite tool is, and it turns out they're identical, except Chuck uses the Sheffield numbering system and Mary May uses the Continental Europe system, so they have one number off. But there are a lot of lists. So Max Sutter had his. I'll put the Max Sutter list of 6 together, and I'll put together the Chuck and the Mary Mays. You can take a look at those.
Great, thank you.
Ultimately, it depends on what you want to make. George, you had another comment? Unmute yourself.
Oh, along the way, we were talking about hook knives earlier for carving spoons and bowls. And now you talk about the Northwest Coast using a bent knife. There's a similarity, but a difference. In Europe, the bevel is on the outside of the bend. And on the Northwest Coast, they put their bevel on the inside to do similar things.
Yeah.
So there's always that choice to make when you choose a knife.
Yep. And Tom, we'll call on Tom Rich shortly, later on tonight too. He can talk about sort of his experience and the one that George made for him. Chuck, rather than playing the 10-minute video, I think what I'll do is I'll just sort of replay some of the conversation that you and I had and kind of pose it in the form of questions, if you don't mind. And it's really what we talked about before. And, you know, maybe just start with your context as a furniture maker, which is kind of dictating what the tools are that you've acquired.
Yeah, that again, my carving is basically just relief carving, and it's based pretty much. I studied with Ian Agrell, who was a British master carver, so the influence is primarily, you know, the European, I guess, designs of foliage and things of that nature. I've done, you know, some Chippendale chairs where you do a lot of like ball and claw, that sort of thing, the 18th century kind of stuff. So most of my designs have always been related to the classical forms of the acanthus leaf and what have you. And as you know, that varies quite a bit depending on what part of the world, whether you're German, you're English, or you're Scandinavian or French or Italian. So there are variations, but so that's kind of what I'm trying to do. And basically, I've done quite a bit of relief carving. I love doing borders. I've had a lot of fun with borders. So that's the kind of carving I'm up against or trying to do. So any go from there.
Yeah, Chuck, just why don't you talk about your journey into carving? Because you started from scratch, right? Some 30 years
Well,
ago. But
uh,
how did you acquire tools and what was that process like?
It started essentially, I back in Rochester, I was a member of the Rochester Woodworkers Society, and we would have a monthly speaker, and one of those was the master furniture maker from Colonial Williamsburg. And, he sat there, I remember at one point in the afternoon, and he carved a ball and clawed foot. He carved that ball, and all of a sudden, this ball appeared out of this square hunk of wood. And I was so fascinated with that. And it dawned on me that, the shape of the tool was what was giving that ball its shape. And I said, God, I gotta look into this. Something I might want to do. And so based on that, I started looking around and found Ian at the time was in Colorado, and he offered 1 week and 2 week courses. So I called him up and talked and went out and spent a week with him, 5 days, 8:30 to 5 in the afternoon. And by the time I got around to Friday, I just, I think began to kind of recognize the tool I need to pick up for the next cut. I mean, it was so complex, everything you're doing, and to develop these skills, other things. And so anyway, before I went, I had asked Ian, well, what tool should I bring? And his comments were, and I think it's a good one, there really isn't any, he said, never buy a basic set of tools. He said, the tools you need depend upon the pattern or the design you're carving. And so there are certain, I think as we've worked out about 8 or 10 that are sort of fundamental, but they're just the beginning, and you're going to have to go from there. But so anyway, I had a good source back in Rochester, and this George was a retired attorney who, he got into it, but he had this store, and he found, I think at that point, this was 1960, we're talking about, 1970, 76 to the late 70s and early 80s, we're talking about. And George was importing, actually he was buying through an importer in Brooklyn who imported the screw variety from Germany, these tools. And at that point, he had a lot of just blank tools on the shelf, different shapes, different sweeps, different sizes. And those tools were actually, still black right from the forge. They had no handles on them. He had a set of handles, you could buy handles for them, and you had to drill your own hole to put the handle or put the tool on, which I did. I had already bought a few. And then based on what Ian suggested, I went to that 1 week course with this basic set, but they weren't sharp yet. So Ian had shop tools that I could borrow to get started. So I had my tool roll in front of me there that first day, and I went home that night, came back the next morning, and lo and behold, all my tools were sharp. The foreman in the shop had stayed over that evening and sharpened all my tools for me. So I sort of lucked out very quickly with a set of tools that would work. But anyway, that's a long story. I bought those tools. I didn't really look around for any more at that point. And I tried to buy in the future from the same importer, and I worked through George to get them because, what bugs me today is you pay for that polished tool. It takes labor to get there. You only need a sharp edge. And so it really bugs me that prices have gone out of sight because of that. Yeah. Anything else? What?
So the brand name of the tools you bought was Dastra. Is that right?
That could be the only thing I went by. Had a little symbol of a screw on the handle. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get some background on that.
Yeah, I believe the screw is the Dastra brand. I'm only mentioning that because the Dastra family is also the same tool that Woodcrafters carries today in the highly polished version of Brock tools. I'll talk about them in a minute, but they're coming out, I think, out of the same forge.
Yep.
In Germany. Which are, you were very happy with those tools. You still have them. Is
Oh,
that right?
gosh, yes. And the price was very reasonable. It was interesting when I was out taking the 3-month course. Even while I'm there for 3 months, he is also running week-long and 2-week-long courses.
Yeah.
And many of the people coming in needed to buy tools, and I'd put them in touch with the place back in Brooklyn because they could get much cheaper tools because again, they weren't all polished. But that's a long story. That's a long time ago, back in 1990. Yeah.
Yeah. In the last 5 years, you bought in some tools. Where have you bought in them?
I guess I bought through the place in Florida, that carving place. They have what is it, the cherry or?
It's Master Carver.
Yeah.
Master Carver.
Yeah. They had some, I bought a few there. I needed, when I was doing some Chippendale work, I needed a bunch of narrower sweep or narrow tools. So I bought quite a few there. One of the problems I ran into with the outfit in Brooklyn, it was originally the father and the son, and they were very unresponsive. You could send a note down and maybe for a month you wouldn't hear from them. And I guess what they would do is accumulate orders and then put their order in Germany. So you had quite a long wait sometimes. And I sort of got fed up with that and didn't go back. But, and George, of course, passed away years ago, so he was no longer a source. But then I also discovered, I think through you mentioned the one in is it Denver?
It's outside of Denver. So
Yeah.
Estes
Yeah.
Park. Yeah.
They carried, in fact, they had a closeout special on a number of tools, and they're from some kind of, or some forge, I guess, in Brooklyn, back in New York. And I was able to get quite a few of those at a very good price. And again, they were not polished. They were only they came with just the slightly ground edge. And I got a number of fishtails and others that I wanted to add to my collection. And that was a much more comfortable pricing situation. So, and they seem to work fine. I'm quite happy with them. They sharpen up beautifully, and so far they're working well.
And I suspect Heidi will talk about those in a few minutes. Those are Sculpture House branded tools that were excess because Sculpture House in New York decided to change their foundries, their forges, and went from Brooklyn to Italy. And so they outsourced everything to, I want to say Mountain Carving Supply. I'll look their name up as we're talking. I've also bought stuff from them, and they seem to be a good source. And I have some of their tools and the Guild, and we bought some of their things in order to round out some of the sets that we needed from these estates. They also, I noticed, in a lot of the tools that we cared about are gone, right? We scarfed them up as well as everybody else in the last 18 months, but they still have some blank blades, blank steel, that if you want to sort of do what Chuck did 30 years ago and, buy some blades and grind them and make your own handles, that's a source for them. It's just one of many sources.
Yeah, I think that the way, I was taught again is, I guess, most carvers, I think, end up sharpening to their own, you develop your own method of sharpening and your own requirements. My son and daughter-in-law were in Egypt for 4 years working on, she had a project there. She was chief party on an educational development program in Egypt. And they, Larry or Rick had run into a gentleman over there, German, who was taking in, in England, in Egypt, every young person there gets a college education at free, no cost. The trouble is you got an education, but then you get out, there's no work. And so there are a lot of young people that have no skills of one thing or another. So this guy was really interested. He had a background in archaeology, or not archaeology, but architecture. He got them involved in reproducing and replacing a lot of the classical woodwork that had been in some of the buildings there. And so Rick thought that if I came over, I could bring some tools and give them a little class on carving, relief carving. So that sounded good to me. So we did. And so I show up, and this young man comes in, and he's going to work with me. And son of a gun, he's got a set of tools that they violated everything I had been taught about how you sharpen a tool and shape of it and so forth. And we start carving this design. And by the way, wood in Egypt just is very difficult to get. And they have no trees, so it's all imported. And we ended up with a hunk of 2x6, really, with knots and everything. And we're carving this rather intricate design that they had. Was quite gorgeous. And this kid, he just starts out whacking away, and it was just amazing what he did. I stood there and sort of watched him in awe. But and his tools were even, you know, the sharpening. God, he was so primitive. But anyway, well, that's a long story. But you get an education that way, so you can make things work. And one of the things that I realized is there are certain kinds of designs you're carving where, you know, you really can't use a flat, you know, right angle kind of blade or sharp, what do you call it, edge. You do need a rounded edge, and I didn't have any. So I was having trouble creating the same thing he was doing. But that's what I'm trying to get at, I guess, is that you develop these things and you have to modify your tools to accommodate the kind of patterns you're working with. And that only comes as you carve and working with experience. Yeah.
Yeah, Chuck, I'd asked you on the interview what if you had a favorite tool.
Oh,
And so,
the one you go to all the time.
yeah, the one
Yeah.
that gets more use than others.
Yeah, it's a number 4 sweep. It happened to be a fishtail, and it was about a 12 millimeter. And for some reason, and I put an inside bevel on that, and that thing always ended up my hand doing an awful lot of, you know, upside down carving and all kinds of things. And the number 4 sweep is one, and when you're working with the Canvas designs and so forth, it shows up quite frequently. So you need a lot of different widths in that, but and you need others. So anyway, that's interesting. By the way, and one of the interesting things in this kind of carving is carving the volute, and that's a, you know, where the spiral comes down. And it's interesting to me how if you as you work up, you start out maybe with a 3, then you move to a 4, and you move to a 5, and then maybe a 6 and a 7 and so forth as you create that. But you get interested in some of these areas, you can use a number 4 that's very narrow, and it will have a greater arc to it than the wider version. If you go from say a 1/2 inch wide down to a 1/4 inch wide, the 1/2 inch wide is opened up more. And so what happens is you can sort of transition using the same sweep number, but having different widths. So that's kind of a revelation. Unfortunately, it means you need more tools, but that's kind of the way it goes.
So Chuck, I think your number 4 is a Sheffield number 4.
Yes, that's the English.
So that'll be Mary May's number 3.
number.
And Mary May's favorite tool is, guess what? A 314.
Yeah, right.
That sort of her thing.
I don't know why that size. Maybe it's just because it feels good and works well. Yeah.
When I took her introductory class and had no interest in carving, she went through the recommended tools. And I remembered number 3, but I didn't remember what size. And I found myself in Victoria on a vacation, and there was a Lee Valley store. So I wanted to buy a chisel, buy a gouge. So I remembered a number 3, but I didn't remember 14. So I ended up with a 3 millimeter number 3. What a mistake. It took me 5 more years to get to the point where I needed that. So I wish I would have remembered that.
Yeah.
So I will post Chuck and I had about a 70-minute conversation, which is really fascinating. I mean, Chuck has got a lifetime of experience in furniture making as well as carving, and as an expert photographer. I mean, he's a fountain of knowledge. So I will post both the long and the short version, and make those available on the website so you can look at those.
Well, it's a difficult thing to cover. There's so many aspects to it, and again, I have got a number. I was fortunate to be able to get a number of antique tools. I have one beautiful little antique tool. The thing's about a 3mm, I think, a little fishtail. It's got the most gorgeous little handle. And a friend of mine who was a collector back in Rochester found that somewhere and gave it to me as a gift. But what a beautiful tool. I mean, you used to pick it up and hold it was exciting.
Yeah, yeah. So let's pause. Is there any questions for Chuck that anybody has? And Roman, I'll come back to you just after, in just a moment. Then Heidi, I'll put you on the spot. Any questions for Chuck? We will be able to, I hope that we'll be able to get back to having Chuck teach again. We did really a lot of, he did terrific classes on his introduction to classical carving. And I think I counted 50 people went through those classes in addition to the borders class, the monogram class, several lettering classes. It's really fantastic. We're really fortunate to have Chuck here and being willing to teach. So let's back up. Roman, I'll spotlight you, and he's accumulated some of his chip carving things to show. Roman, by the way, is Roman's in San Jose and is part of the Santa Clara Valley Carving Club, chapter number 1 of the California Carvers Guild.
Thank you. Let me show a few knives and I will comment and just switch the camera. First of all, I would like to bring attention to X-Acto knife. It should be in every collection because you need something to open Amazon packages with, right? You don't want you to use your carving knives. When we are talking about folding knives, it's important that all of them should have a lock. I heard so many different stories when people actually got injuries because they used just a regular knife that was folded. I use what Terry shared. Interesting thing about that, and that is a plastic sheath, you can see. Yes, it's kind of, you need to be very careful. I don't know. What's interesting about that knife, it comes with 2 versions. This one is sharpened on the straight edge, and there is a version that is sharpened on the curved edge. So they use the same shape to produce 2 different knives. You can buy both of them. Interesting thing about the knives, that is from fail, how do I call it?
It's the consensus seems to be file, not feel.
Okay. So this is a skew kind of knife. Is very popular, is traditional, and this an example of the Russian made knife. It's also skew knife. You can see similarities here. What's interesting about that knife has a bevel on both sides, the same as like that. See? Interesting, this knife is a go-to knife in Russia, Ukraine, and Northern Europe. Carvers use it to do undercutting, to do many types of carving, including chip carving. That chip carving style that is done with that knife, called Old World style of carving. And how it's done, you do 3 vertical cuts first, like here, here, and there, and then carve bevels. With the regular chip carving knife, like that is popular here in the US, you usually use that kind of knife. Many different manufacturers produce exactly the same knife sorry. You can see the shape is identical. These are the version of chip carving knife that is small. It comes with a larger version too. Another interesting knife is a Kalrosin knife. What it's very thick. You may see the blade is very thick and the bevel is on both sides. It's not really a carving knife, but it's more like an impression knife. You separate fibers, not very deep, just to put something between those fibers, like grinding coffee or coal, like a powder. So it becomes a pattern there. So you use it just to scratch the wood and put something colorful inside. That is a Vietnamese knife. It's used to carve fruits. And you can see it's a stainless steel because it needs to handle a lot of moisture. It's very thin and long because you can carve very interesting and deep cuts in the fruit, like watermelon or something else. See, interesting that it's reversible. You can use one blade at a time, and it's like that. Also, the sheath and that handle part can be used to do impression in the fruits. Another interesting knife is a Japanese knife. That is used for carving, and you can see it's very similar to other skew knives that are popular in other parts of the world. Interesting about Japanese knife, the bevel only on one side, and the back side of the blade is a little bit hollow. And that is done so it's easy to sharpen. When you sharpen, you don't need to remove metal from inside, only from the outer edge of the blade. I don't know if it's visible here, but that is a little bit like hollow. And just a couple of more minutes. You can always carve your own knife. You don't need a forgery for that. It's a little opener, 20 minutes of work, get a branch, whittling. You know, I like whittling. And another thing, how to maintain your knives. This is a strop, handmade strop, piece of leather on a board, and you can decorate as you wish. Thank you very much. That is my collection.
Super. Thank you, Ron. And I will reiterate that when I took a couple classes in Japanese woodblock carving, they do use a single bevel skew, smaller than the one that Roman had. If anybody wants to dive down that, give me a call. I thought we'd spend about a half hour on knives. We just spent an hour. So it's quite interesting that it's a fundamental tool, I guess. So Heidi, I'm going to call on you. But I asked Heidi if she would share her carving experience. She and I started about the same time, kind of on this journey, because we were teaching middle school kids how to do woodworking, and carving became one of our interests. So we latched on to Jeff Harness. So Heidi, you want to share your journey?
Sure. As Larry said, I started with him and Jeff. And so I dove straight into the palm gouges, mainly from Drake. and I will get one of my favorites. Number threes, we've talked about a lot because number threes are just super useful. I like the Drakes because they're very comfortable in the hand. They've got a nice little flat. They don't go rolling off the table. And I really enjoyed working with Palm Tools and Jeff until he moved to Arizona. And then I was in search of other things. And as you will find from my tools, I have never settled on any one style, which means I haven't gained competency in any one kind of carving. It's very all over the place. And so my favorite tool is going to change because the person that I'm learning from is doing something different, and I'm excited by that, and I want to try that too. So I had a lot of fun with Drakes, and then also a few flex cuts that were palm work, and then those got put aside for a long time, and I was hanging out working with Chuck for a bit, and so I ended up with some of his master carver that he was recommending, and so I don't think we've shown those. You can see from here that the shaft is not polished, but the tips you can get nice and shiny. So those were fun. As I was trying to put together a tool set, I was really pretty much starting from zero, and I needed stuff that I can pound on. And so about that time, a new company was selling tools that were fairly inexpensive. And this is Larry, am I pronouncing it right? Is it Schaaf or Shaft?
I always pronounce it shaft, but I'd never heard it pronounced. So
Oh.
both are correct, probably.
Okay. So what I was looking for was to amass a set of tools fairly quickly, but in different profiles so that I could experiment and see what I liked. And these were fairly inexpensive. And if there are a few people, I think, on this call who are maybe starting at the beginning stage, if you want to buy a set and just want something easy, I found that this was fairly good. You get what you pay for. I learned to sharpen because I bought these tools. So there's always that. And Larry has mentioned the Sculpture House tools. Those I added with some of the tools that were on closeout through Sculpture House. And I just went to their website, and they still have some tools available. Not a wide variety of profile ranges, but if it's a tool that fits your need, the price is pretty good. And the quality of the steel seemed pretty good to me. They seem to keep their edges. And a lot of, I would say half of my tools that I have now, I got from thrifting, stopping at estate sales or just looking at tools at thrift stores. And one of those Larry asked me to mention was Don's. So in Lafayette, Oregon, Don's Coin and Tool. I went out there and I bought a couple things. You can't get a great deal from Don's because he knows what he has. So they're not going to be the cheapest used tools you've ever had. But what he has available is usually pretty good. I've only been out there once or twice. Just last month, I stopped at an estate sale in my neighborhood, and I got three Buck Brothers tools that had been very poorly treated, and I had to regrind them. But, after a few years, you finally learn how to sharpen a tool. It took me a while, but I can do it now. So that's a benefit. Larry, did you have anything else you wanted me to cover?
Oh, that's it. That's perfect. Do you use your palm tools as well as your mallet ready now, or how has that evolved?
So I had not been using the palm tools, but then Michael Cullen was in town. And so I brought a few of those tools with me because some of the profiles that I have in those tools, I don't have in my mallet tools. And it rekindled my joy in using them. Like, they really are lovely just to sit down and do handwork with. And on spring break, we grabbed our kids who are in college and we did a road trip. And so I made a little kit and a couple of palm tools, like a nice flat profile and a V tool, and a little U gouge, and then a trusty flex cut, all fit in here. I was admiring those lovely folding sets. I'm not sure how they'd feel in my hand. I get picky about the tactile, but I like to have just a way that I could carry a couple little tools. And so I think I got this. Yeah, this is a Master Carver combo stone, and then a couple of pieces of leather for stropping and a little oil. And it feels fairly safe and compact to carry a few sharp things in the bag.
It's great. Tom, Rich, I think I'll call on you next. I think you have Master Carver experience as well. So we'll talk about that you next. My journey started with palm tools. Jim Medeiros passed away. His estate sale had carving tools, and I didn't know better, but I got there early and I got in the door first. And I bought his palm set of 7 tools, file tools. That became my go-to beginning set. It was only when Chuck came along that I discovered the value of long handle tools from the kind of stuff that I want to do. But it turns out the palm ones are joy to use. And I ended up acquiring some Gildrake stuff as well. And Tom, you are also, I asked if you'd share some of your experience with Master Carver and others.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
My first carving class at the Guild of Oregon Woodworkers was with Jeff Harness doing characters, and it was the small tools, the palm tools. And so I bought 3, I think, or maybe 4, 3 tools, 3 gouges, and then the knife. And that was fun. But then when Mary May came and talked with us, I learned about the big tools, and then I signed up for a class with Chuck, and that was the beginner class for classical. And I didn't have a set, so and I'm on a budget. So I decided to go ahead and buy the Master Carver, and so this is one of them. And I had gone to Mary May's website, and she has the basic tools you should have to start, and they didn't have any of those tools, any of them. They had like a 715. Well, Master Carver doesn't have a 715, they have a 712, and they have a 73, but that's about it. So I bought a set of Master Carver, and I think they were 10 tools or maybe 11 tools, and a really nice canvas roll to put them in. I found that they roll off, they're round, so they roll off the table really easy. So I flattened 2 sides so that they will sit on the table and not roll off the table. So that's one modification that I made. Then I finished the place where I sanded that off. I labeled them so I could remember what the numbers are. And this one is a 512. I think a 515 was in Mary's list. But anyway, it's like when I started golf, which is a long time ago, I decided that I would buy the cheapest golf clubs that I could find. And I went to Goodwill and I bought a set of golf clubs. And I thought, well, I'll play golf until I'm better than the clubs are. Well, it's kind of the same with the chisels. I will carve until I am better than the chisels are, and then I'll get better chisels. Well, I haven't gotten to that point yet. So that's, they work great for me. I have, I've added to them. I do go to estate sales. I'm part of the estate sale team on the Guild of Oregon Woodworkers and occasionally find some nice things there. And so I've added to the mix. Also, in Massa's class, he showed us a different kind of handle. And so I made some of those so that I can use them. I didn't bring one to show. But Larry mentioned a tool that I got from George. I asked him if he could do a hook knife for me. And because I had talked with Adam and I had seen Adam's tools, I thought, well, I want one like that. And I want one with the bevels on the inside, like his are, and flat on the outside. And George recommended that I get one with the bevels on the outside because I wanted to do spoons and cups and things like that. And this is better for the deeper indentations. And that if it were flat on the outside and then beveled on the inside, that's more for really shallow curves, shallow holes. So this has been really great. And I want to show you an example. One of the things I do, we're doing comfort birds. Here's some comfort birds we're doing for the carving group. This is a comfort turtle, or the article for this actually says comfort tortoise, but it's really a comfort turtle. And there's a hollow on the bottom. And so you can put it in your hand and then kind of rub the tummy. And it's a little hollow. And so that knife, this is one in process. This is another turtle that's going to be at the Gathering of the Guilds. And this is a beautiful little curve, and that knife makes that beautiful little curve really nicely. The rest of it is all done with knives like Terry showed, and like everybody has showed, a nice knife. This is all done with knife and tool, and not except for the bandsaw. That's the only power tool that I've used on this. And you can get to a nice little finished comfort turtle like that. So I don't know if you need anything else. I like Mastercarver. They are limited in the sizes that they offer, but they are good tools and they sharpen well. And I don't find any problem with keeping them sharp and keeping them useful.
What we didn't mention is that Mastercarver's prices are same price for every tool, $20 a tool.
Mhm.
And if you buy more than $200 and you get on a magic list, they might even give you a 10% discount. But that $20 per tool is a lot more digestible than some of these tools that start going for $40 to $70 each. So if money is no object, the answer to the question, what tools do I buy, is way different than for most mere mortals that have to deal with the fact that we make trade-offs, right? So Mastercarver becomes, an important resource.
The kit that I bought was $99 and there were 10 tools.
Yeah. Yeah, we have that list. Chuck put together also one of the kits that they had, plus augmented it in order to get out the 12 the tools that he had recommended that we wanted. We have, if you are in the market for buying things, trying things, we have some tools. We have Mastercarvers in the tool library. We have shaft tools in the tool library. We have Stubai, we have Dastra, we have Swiss Made, we have Henry Taylor's, we have a wide variety of English and Chinese. The Mastercarvers are made in China, as well as the shafts. I talked to the owner of Shaft when we were going through this a couple of years ago, and he was very happy with the quality coming out of China for the tools. But he said the history of Chinese-made products is they always give you the good stuff at the beginning, and then they compromise as time goes on. So his his goal was to have a testing process that would monitor the quality coming out. And I don't know how well it's done. He's still in business, lives in the Bay Area. He's still on Amazon. You can go to SCHAAF and look at their kits. He's expanded into gloves, but he also dealt with the issue that Heidi is dealing with, is that you're going to have to spend time sharpening. So he has a version of it which is sharpened, and you get to see what the cost of the product is for getting them sharp. And so that's the trade-off in the grand scheme of things for time versus money versus quality versus resharpening time. Generally speaking, you can go to Woodcraft and buy file Swiss-made tools, and they'll be sharp. Just test them to make sure someone didn't do a return on you and they didn't leave it in the best of shape. But generally speaking, you get sharp, ready to go tools coming out of Swiss-made, and that scenario. Tom Sipe, I'll call you next, but I want to let me just summarize my half-hour video conversation with Steve Penberthy. Steve is the owner of Woodcrafters, just across the river in downtown Portland. He's been at it for a long time as a store manager and as an owner, and as carving. His carving history goes back to the Western Woodcarvers Associations into the late 80s, I think, because his name popped up, and he's been carrying carving tools for a long time. And so in Portland, if you were of the three sponsors that we have, Rockler doesn't seem to have very much. So it's not, my own experience is not very likely that I'll find what I want. They have a few little flex cut things you can get started with. But your main choices are going to be Woodcraft or Woodcrafters. And Woodcraft in the United States is the only source for Swiss-made tools. You're going to buy Swiss-made in the United States through a Woodcraft store, mail order, or the store. And if they're out of stock locally, they can order it. You might be able to get it. You might be lucky. They have a big warehouse in, I think, West Virginia. And so within reason, you can get things out of mail order. However, in Canada, there are a couple of sources. One is in the East Coast of Canada, Chipping Away. And Chipping Away will discount Swiss-mades so that they basically compensate for the shipping cost. And they carry Mary May's recommended and expanded recommended sets, as well as a whole lot of other things. I forgot the name of the one in Vancouver, in BC area, but there's another one that Ruth Warmington buys from and likes. So they're Canadian sources. All three companies are really good friends of ours. I mean, we really love them for a variety of reasons. The problem with Swiss-made right now is the same problem with Helvey knives, and the same problem with Gildrake is their demand far exceeds supply. And the manager of Woodcraft said, I can sell anything I can get my hands on, but I can't get my hands on a lot. So they got a reasonable inventory of Swiss-made, but it is limited, and they're kind of stuck, not even knowing what's going to be coming out of Switzerland. In my interview with Steve Penberthy, they carry a line of long-handled mallet-ready tools called Bracht, B-R-A-C-H-T. It's a name that nobody knows, but it turns out it's an identical tool to about 5 other brands that are all coming out of the same factory in Germany. The most well-known one is Two Cherries. But Bracht is a product that is comparable or equal quality to Swiss-made and comparable or equal pricing as Swiss-made. And the big difference is that if you look at this display wall at Woodcrafters, it's massive. It's absolutely massive. Steve has made an investment because he's a private business and he's been at it for decades. And he said, I buy everything, and I buy multiples of everything that are in demand. So if you need a tool, you can't go on a website to find out, but you can call them and they will tell you whether they have it in stock. That's what they do. And they have it's really massive inventory. They also carry the largest inventory of flex cut tools around. Woodcraft has a sizable collection. Woodcrafters has the entire collection and multiples of them. So it's kind of like a convenience thing where they've made that investment. I will post the video interview that I did with Steve Penberthy. He's quite a fascinating guy, and he's really a terrific resource for us. As is Eric, the manager of Woodcraft in Tigard, because we are now having free access to their classrooms, and Roger is teaching monthly stropping classes at Woodcraft. And they've opened up their classroom for us, and we expect that we'll start doing regular carving classes and carving meetings at that store. And we will do the same thing at Woodcrafters as soon as we can. He hinted at the fact that they're going to do an expansion, which would open up a classroom. He said that is their dream. And they have always done a lot of educational things. So as a tool suppliers, those two are I think the major ones here. So with that, Heidi, yeah.
Do you know if they're going to be expanding where they currently are, or are they looking at another site?
I didn't want to pursue that with them. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. But it sounded like a sizable expansion. And I don't know that they have space to go. I don't know. But we'll stay tuned. Stay tuned. These stores are really significant. We are so lucky to have them in our backyard. Okay, Tom, how would you like to unmute yourself, and I will spotlight you. I'm going to step away from the camera for just a moment, but I will be back.
Okay, in the interest of time, hopefully, there we go. I'll be a little quicker, I think. I would also talk, first of all, I want to mention that I went to Woodcrafters and got some Brox tools, and I actually like them better than the Swiss made and the file tools, because they have a little bit more metal in the shaft, and it just had a better feel to it. I was surprised. Anyway, on to very, rather than subtle things like gouges and knives, we have some tools that you can use to, this actually won't fit in my completing, but this is called a froe. And what I use this for, I guess I should give you background. I've not got Larry to give me prompts. When I first started working with wood, I took a class from Roy Underhill, and it was about making bowls out of green wood. So that's where my first interests lie. So when you saw up logs from a fallen tree, first thing you need to do is take a round of the tree and then slice it. Well, this is the thing that you use to slice it. You use something like this, actually something a bit larger than this, but a root ball with a handle on it, and you whap it like that, and you can very easily split the wood. Now what you do is you get it lodged in there, and then it's got a long handle, and what you do is you just bring it to the side, and it splits it open. And then you can pound it again, split it, pound it, and you can do a pretty sizable log with that. And then what you do is you take a subtle axe. This is a carving axe, and it's got a very heavy head. And Initially, you'll have the heft here, but a lot of the times you'll be using it right here. And the reason for that is it's got a very heavy head, so it doesn't take much to be able to get that. From that, you go to a more subtle axe, and unfortunately, I could not find my favorite axe. I'll show you what this looks like here. If you'll notice that there's bevels on both sides. Well, I have a single bevel axe, which is very good for smoothing out blanks prior to making bowls. If you have a double bevel, it tends to dig in. But with a single bevel, it tends to slice off so that you can get a lot smoother. And then when you go from the bowl, then you want to take your adze, and this is a fairly deep one, and then hollow out the bowl. And this is what I used. I've made probably a dozen or so bowls using this technique. And then I started branching out into other kinds of carving. Along the way, I did come across the fact that there was the Northwest Indian art, which I enjoyed looking at. Noticed that they had, there was a company called Kestrel. And they had adzes, which are much nicer tools than the big brute force and ignorance type of a tool that I had before. Got two adzes, one of which is curved and one of which is straight. And this is apparently the style that the local people used before Europeans got here. Anyway, over here, it's got a nice spring to that. I believe this is alder, and this is a very nicely textured handle, and is wrapped in the traditional way. I also got from them some knives we haven't talked about, except is the hook knives. And the straight knife. And these are really good for finishing out the bowl. I think George mentioned that the bevel is on the inside. I think having the bevel on the other side would really work a lot better, because it took a very light touch to be able to kind of scrape it off like that. If the bevel was on the bottom, I'd be able to do a quick, just a sweep like that. It should be lots easier, and I look forward to acquiring some tools from George so that I can do that. It's basically all I had in terms of axes. Unfortunately, I really wish I could show you the single bevel axe, but any questions?
Tom, you showed making handles for the removable blades.
Yes.
Is that still an option?
Sure. Okay, so I got a set of flex cut knives or gouges, but like this, but it only had one handle, and I was too impatient to have more than to pull this out, put another one in. So I made handles for them all. The handles that I made were slightly different than the handles that were flex cuts. That I did keep the kind of a guitar shape, but I made them a lot flatter. And the reason for that was that I can hold it, especially if gouges. I can hold it, and I know where the gouge is going. So I can do it by feel, and I don't have to look at it. That's especially important with some of the smaller tools. But this is, they call it Osage orange. This is actually in Texas, we call this a bodark. And it is extremely easy to carve when it's green, and it's just like iron when it's dried. And this has been dried for a number of years. The flex cuts have a hole in them. So I drilled through the hole. I sliced the handle in half and then carved out the reciprocal for the tang and then glued it back together. And I've had these for a number of years and have not had a problem with it. These are brass fittings on that. But I think there's not much variation in it. That's sapwood and that's the heartwood.
Are those go-to tools for you? Are they frequently used?
I have been using mostly long tools, but when I'm doing some detail work, these are go-to. This is probably the one I use the most, and this one's second. This is about a 3 sweep, so I think that's pretty traditional. This is about a 6 or 7. In terms of my long tools, I've got to go with everybody else. It's a 3F14. It's what I tend to use to just do general purpose carving.
Thanks, Tom. Any questions for Tom? I will point out that historically, but even currently, a company called Ramelson was a big deal, is a really big deal. Ramelson was the primary palm tool supplier and mid-handle supplier, I would say in the 80s and into the 90s. At the time when Max Sutter and the Western Woodcarvers were around, that's what they did. That's what they bought. Woodcrafters carried Ramelson tools. And then FlexCut came along. And Ramelson's still in business, but the Chinese came along and copied what Ramelson was doing and flooded the US market with those same handles. They're kind of, I would say, ruby red, dark red, maroon kind of handled things. And they would private label them. So woodcrafters carried, thank you, Heidi. Woodcrafters put their own name on them, but they were all made at a forge in New Jersey. I had a conversation with the president of that when we were getting started a couple of years ago. And he said that at the heyday of the carving industry in the United States, which was kind of peaked in the late 80s, early 90s, they could not keep up with their output. They just could not keep up. And then the world changed. So in the world today, FlexCut basically supplanted what Ramelson had in the United States as a dominant supplier. And they are everywhere, right? They're beginning carving kits. So, some wife worried about her husband retiring and not knowing what he's going to do for the rest of his life in retirement, buys him the three thing, right? Or a roughing knife and a detail knife and a blank of wood and a pattern and a book and hope that he just falls in love with it. And some do, and some don't, right? Yeah, Chuck, you got one, huh? So you were there. So there's a lot of it. And Steve Penberthy told the same story that Two Cherries is doing the same thing. They sell tens of thousands of kits during Christmas time, just a few tools on Amazon. And so the Two Cherries brand. So how do you pronounce that in German? I would say Kirschen, right? Cherries in the German language. So it's been around for a long time, but the Brock tools, all those are coming out. But FlexCut seems to really dominate the equation. Jeff Harness, who we mentioned several times, was my go-to instructor before Chuck showed up. And he basically said, it's spring steel, it's good steel, it's not great steel, it's spring steel. They temper it down to a short distance from the edge. And when you sharpen it, you're going to eventually sharpen through that hardened, tempered edge. But most carvers never carve enough to have sharpened enough to wear that tool out. But if you do, it's affordable enough, you throw it away and go buy another one. So it's sort of like, that's the trade-off, longevity for all that. Roman.
Thank you for sharing how the tool market evolved from one company to another. I would like to point out that the number of carvers actually reduced for the last 20, 30 years. And that may be an additional reason why different companies becomes more popular than before. So it's not just tools, it's also how many carvers we have here in the US.
That's right. Yep. Yep. So those of us, this conversation is around tools with edges. I met a guy, grew up and worked for the fisheries department in the state of Oregon, lives in Corvallis. He now lives in California. He loves carving. His name is Tom Nicholson, and he's developed arthritis. And he loves carving what wood that I don't know, called California Buckeye burl. He said it's so hard that you can't carve it with hand tools. And besides, his arthritis wouldn't allow him to do that either. So he's into power carving. So, and there's another guy that I ran across at the Lincoln City show at the Coastal Carvers. I think his name was Larry Roberts. I'm not sure for sure of his name. He's in his early 80s, lives on Southern Oregon coast. He carves virtually everything out of manzanita root. And it's too hard to carve with hand tools. And in the Monday morning conversations that we have, there was a show and tell about these little Japanese miniatures called Netsuke. They were 100, samurai and others would use them for little dongles to hold their cords so they could have their purses on their bodies because they had no pockets. And those things were carved out of ivory, and a lot of them are carved today out of boxwood. Very hard stuff, and besides, it's miniature, and so the tools evolved to deal with what you're dealing with. And the hand tool side of this was one part of it, and it's a huge world. I love Tom Rich's comment about golf clubs, or fishing, or my wife's studying embroidery now. Heaven forbid I made the mistake of encouraging her to take a class from a master embroiderer who studied embroidery in London. You got to be kidding. You wouldn't believe the contraptions that are being now coming by my eyeballs and all this supplies. But the analogies are exactly the same, right? And I think everybody here would agree that, more tools aren't going to make us better carvers. They'll help, right? Better design will make us better carvers. Better materials and better woods will make us, right? Better tools will help. Better skills will help a lot more. Better finishes, however we finish, will make a better product. And then all of that doesn't work unless it's used correctly, right? So you spend all this time developing this master green man or relief carving, and then it's got put on a wall with poor lighting. Okay, so how
And better communication.
Thank you.
Being part of the club helps a lot. I'm learning from all people who share their experience.
Yeah.
This is very important. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. So let me just put Jerry Boone on the spot, or Diane Moser on the spot, or Diane, I think when I first met you a few years ago, you were talking about doing a totem pole for your new place in Molalla. Is that right? Is that still a dream?
Yes, actually, Adam's presentation was very inspiring to me. And I felt like I learned a few things to make sure to be careful of, which is don't put the totem pole on the ground, mount it above, keeping the water away, which was really great. But I would have to hang out with him.
Yeah.
But I came up with an idea of what I want using my ancestry and symbolism, either ancestral symbolism or whatever, for my totem pole, making it personal to me.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I loved his presentation. Yeah.
I also discovered on that same theme, you could do miniature totem poles as a way to get the design worked out. Right.
That's a good
And so,
thought.
right. So it
That's great.
it may take more work to do that, but
Yeah.
what will Adam say? He said, well, first of all, go find an old growth Western red cedar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Some of
Okay.
his totem poles were really quite large.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're large and they're specialized material, because he talked about that disc. He said that, he's having trouble finding sources that would sell to him some of this old
Yeah.
growth wood, right? It's so precious. So that becomes a challenge.
And just FYI, today I happened to stumble across a series, and I don't even know what, because now I don't even have cable anymore. I just subscribe to Hulu and whatever those Netflix. I'll have to see if I can find it, but there's a show on one of those programs now called Master Carver, and it's about this guy in Eureka. No, it's not Master Carver, Master Woodworker, and he's in Eureka, but it's an amazing show, and he's really learned a lot just about life and spirituality, his own self-worth, and he brings that all into the show. It's wonderful.
Wow.
I'll have to text you so you can post it somewhere.
Look it up, but I'm looking at Tom Sipe. I mean, we having input from members really becomes the lifeblood of this organization, right? So any things you discover, any books, any websites, any examples, any shows, all that stuff really adds up. So feed it into newsletter. Tom? What's your email address?
Well, the one that's easy to remember is my name, Tom
Okay.
@sipe.us.
Yeah, you just have to remember how to spell your last name.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
if you're not German, it's easier.
Okay.
I before
can-
E.
Okay, you can text me and I'll forward it. But anyway, that if you would look that up, Diane, that would be great.
I will. Yeah.
Larry, if I can interject for Diane, when you do get around to making the commitment to do the poll, get some people to go with you to be sure that you get a piece of wood that's really going to work for you.
Thank you.
I made the mistake. Well, I had a friend of mine up in the Seattle area who was clearing a bunch of Western red cedar, and he wrote me an email and says, Boone, I got this 80-inch long piece of Western red cedar. I know you want to do a totem pole. I got it set aside for you. Come on up and get it. And, I ended up with a totem pole. Was I real happy with it? No, not really. Because a lot of it was, frankly, the wood had its own, it kind of knew what it wanted me to do. It wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. So I ended up, it's the type of project where people go by and just say, oh, wow, that looks really great. But in my mind, I just say, it was the wrong piece of wood and it made me compromise the design. And if I was going to start it all over again, I'd have just told my friend, thanks an awful lot for that piece of wood. I think it's going to work really well in the fireplace.
Yeah. Did you have your design worked out before you went to look for the wood?
Well, it wasn't a case of me looking for the piece of wood. It was the case that this is the piece of wood that he gave me.
Oh.
And it was basically about 80 inches tall, and it was 9.5 inches at the base and about 8.5 inches so it was, I guess, for lack of a better description, it was about a quarter scale totem pole.
Yeah.
And it, as I said, people who looked at it, they just rave that it's a beautiful piece of work. But I look at it and I just say, it's just one series of compromises upon another. And I really ended up with something that I wasn't horribly happy with.
Thanks for the tip. Yeah.
And much of it was because the wood itself just wasn't going to work for that.
Yeah. Thank you. And Heidi, I saw she just posted the name of that show I was talking about on chat. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. I will republish this, the chat links in the, once the recording of this video is alive and available, I will send out to everybody registered. So all these little tidbit things will get put in that email. That'll be a help. Jerry, do you have any wisdom to share about about this tools, favorite knives, favorite sources, made in Arizona, anything that you would?
Yeah, some of my favorite sources for tools are Craigslist. I've purchased a lot of them from Craigslist. I look almost every day, and I have when I buy new tools, I buy predominantly Swiss mades, mostly because I like the tools and I like to support the local businesses. But at the same time, if I can find a really, really good deal on a set of tools and on a Craigslist, and I'll do it, and you can buy them for basically about a third of what they cost brand new. And so I've ended up with an awful lot of repeats because people are selling a box of let's say 10 2 cherries, and I bought a set, and out of the 10 2 cherries, there's probably 6 of them are repeats of what I've already got, but the other 4 are really worth having. And so the other ones, they just kind of sit there, and what the extras allow me to do is I can sharpen them all. And if I get carving and I'm maybe carving someplace where I don't have a sharpening system close to me, I can take the 2 or 3 repeats and I can just keep carving. When one gets dull, I grab, when my Swiss made gets dull, I grab the 2 cherry. When the 2 cherry gets dull, I grab the Henry Taylor.
Yeah, let me reiterate that too, Jerry. Diana Larrabee is on the board. She's took a lot of carving classes. She bought her set of Swiss made on eBay. She just found someone that was selling the entire collection, and she just gambled and bought the whole thing and was very happy with that as a source. And we never think about that. Jeff Hardis' advice to us when we were getting started, he said, you shouldn't have to spend more than $20 a tool on the used market. Sometimes you can get them for 15. So in that 15 to 20 range for used tools, because you have a gamble, right? You don't know if it's rusted, if it's pitted, whether it's damaged in some form. So there's you'll take a gamble. But that's that model has worked for me as purchaser of tools on behalf of putting these kits together. And that's worked out, not always, but more often than not. Besides,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, just one last thing. Heidi mentioned Don's Coins in Lafayette, Oregon. I stopped there on the way to the beach if I'm going in that direction. He's got a box of stuff, and it's not much in there. There's a lot of junk, but occasionally there's the good stuff, right? And he does know what it's worth, and it's still a good price. I really enjoy these old antique tools as well. The other source like that is the antique store in Multnomah Village, kitty corner from the Starbucks store. I go in there every time I can. The guy, I forgot the woman's name that owns it. She has a glass cabinet with woodworking tools. And there's a guy that used to own another woodworking antique store in Multnomah Village, retired, used to feed stuff in there. And I picked up a number of really favorite tools from there. They don't last. I mean, Jerry Boone must be shopping there as well, because other people are kind of going through that. But I find that to be a source. The things in the occasionally there will be things, right, Steve Moore, in the Guild estate sales. Sometimes not. Sometimes the team will let me know that things are available, and we scoff them up and put them in the carving sig. library, but relatively few things come through there.
One of the things that's worth looking at if you're in the tool acquisition phase, and I think most carvers never stop acquiring tools, is to do some research on some of the brands that maybe aren't as well known in the US. You know, if you go to England, you know, they look at Ashley Isles and Henry Taylor's and things like that, which are every bit as good as the Swiss maids. They're just not as well known here. I bought a set of 22 gouges by a company named Mifer, M-I-F-E-R, which was a Spanish company. And they made absolutely superb carving tools. They were sold predominantly in Spain and Portugal. It's a very, very old company. Back in the 80s, like so many other companies, they ended up in financial problems and they closed down their carving tool shop. Everything got sold to some company in South America. But the Mifer tools they're wonderful tools. They're well built, they're strong, you get them, they hold an edge beautifully, and they go for, you know, a third or a quarter of what it would cost you for some of the better known brands. And I love them. And I paid basically about $10 a piece for them.
That's great. I'll put a plug in for Ashley Isles. I love their tools. I don't like their round handles, but I love their tools. And I love the Tools for Working Wood website in New York. That's the best, easiest place to find out whether there's something in stock or not, because they really got it really well organized. Chris Pye loves a French company. I don't know how to pronounce Auriou, A-U-R-I-O-U, I think. The flat lettering kits that Chris Pye promotes in his book and that Chuck was using for his lettering class. I own some of those. They're really nice tools. It goes on, right? So let's go buy some more golf clubs, shall we? Maybe we'll figure out how to turn golf clubs into carving tools, long-handled carving. It's not the bewitching hour, but it's getting close to the bewitching hour. Anybody else have wisdom, experience? Anything that anybody bought something and regret buying? Say, don't do this. George.
I have an idea that I discovered about 2 days ago. You know, I've been making special gouges for spoons that have sharp or pronounced curves to the gouge. And I was having trouble pushing on some of them. And I started thinking about what direction we push when we want to carve. I made some drawings. We have a straight.
You have to hold it up, George. Let's see it. Right. It's folded in the middle.
A straight tool, you're pretty close to in line with the handle. Okay, you got that one?
Okay.
And then the tools that I've been making, you can buy them. There's a lot of different suppliers that have a sharp sweep for going inside a spoon, but the direction of the cut is not lined up with the handle. So my idea is to have people think about, what if you put more bend back here and you make the curve in line with the handle? So is it more important for the end of the tool to be in line with the handle, or is it more important for the direction of the cut to be parallel with the handle? I've been getting some really good results with the parallel idea, so I'd like to have people think about that.
It's a good framework, George. George made and shipped us 9 of those spoon gouges that get tried out in a class on Thursday. We have this 2-week pilot class that Al Plash is teaching, and we'll be using a knife and that spoon gouge test it out. It'll get some real world experience here pretty quickly.
And that's a pretty standard shape that you can get from various sources.
Yeah.
I tried making some of mine that had more bend in the shaft and the cutting edge is parallel. Boy, I really like that idea. I'm gonna be adapting that into other tools. Parallel is, to me, is more important than the edge in line with the handle.
Roman.
I think it's easy to test that idea when you use the tool with a mallet. Then you can see if it's important to have the point on the same line with the handle or not. And I think that may be a reason why most people use it. For example, for wood turning, hollow tools also have this hook. They must have that point in line with the handle because of the tool rest and how the tool is positioned. But for carving tools, I think for manual tools without a mallet, it may work very well, but we still better to test it with a mallet and see if it works well or not.
Well, if you have that sharp a spoon bend, you never use that tool with a mallet because the mallet is driving against the angle of where the edge is. So it has to be done by hand, which is fine. That's basically a hand tool. But I'm just thinking we have lots of long sweep tools that the edge is in line with the handle. If I bend that down some more so that the sweep goes below the handle and then is parallel, I'm thinking that if I make some of those are going to work better. I'm still looking at stuff. I'm asking everybody to think about it and see if you can visualize what your opinion is of that.
Yeah, we'll give it a try, George. The only other comment I would make is that carving is not just, it's a rotational movement as well as a pushing movement, depending on where the grain is going. So you got both of those things going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, just an idea to think about. Maybe make some drawings and try visualizing what that's like, and then I'll make some tools and we'll test it.
Yeah.
George is, let's see, oops, where's my hand? Get over there. Ah, there we go. Is this sort of what you're talking about?
No, that's an edge tool. I'm talking about one that's sharp on the end.
Oh, just, okay,
Just the gouge, like a gouge.
okay, but bent, but sharp on it, like, okay, okay,
But you use the sharpness on the side is what you're using on that one.
yeah. I thought from your drawing, yeah. Must be getting too late for me.
Yeah, okay. Let's see.
Misinterpreted your drawing.
I'll put Mr. Mengus on the. So the question is, do you get more confused tonight about what to do? What are you going to do as a result of all this information and conversation?
I have no idea.
Yeah, me neither.
But it thrills me to listen to people who are a lot more experienced than me talking about their tools. And mostly I'm wary of buying new tools. I like the golf club theory. I have a handful of tools, 5, some really cheap and some very good. But working with what I have, and I put in a couple of thousand strokes tonight during this meeting.
There we go.
So that's made it all worthwhile, listening to people who are experienced and working on my own little Easter bunny for this week for my grandkids.
Oh, that's great. I would say my parting advice, the best thing I've ever did was to create a spreadsheet and keep track of all the parameters of all the tools and keep it in my pocket and keep it in my car. Because when I find myself at an antique store or at an estate sale and something pops up and says, see, do I have that or don't I have that? Do I? And it saves a lot of money and a lot of grief for buying the duplicates. I'm not in the Jerry's mode of carving so much that I need repetitive tools to be able to do that. But keeping an inventory really does help. And because you can't memorize all this stuff. And I keep track of the date I bought it, how much I paid for it, what the brand is, what the sweep is, what the width is, whether it's single or double bevel, what the stamp is, and any of the comments. I've done that for all the tools that are in the tool library. Otherwise, we go crazy.
I do have one tool that I bought at Woodcrafters maybe 30, 35 years ago. And it's a gouge. I'm not sure what bevel it is, but I've got the price on it. Oh, it's a 7 3/8. It doesn't have a name on it, but it cost $11.35 at the time. So
Does it have a-
Yeah.
Is there anything stamped in the metal on the blade? Any symbol or any number?
no, it's a little pitted. All it says, it's a black, black with just the end bevel shiny, but it's a little pitted, but that's all it is. It doesn't, but I was wondering if I bought it at Woodcrafters 30 years ago, what brands were they selling at that time?
Well, next time you go in, take it in and ask for Steve Penberthy and ask him.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
claims he was selling this Brax product line then. I don't know that for sure, but I think that's what he said.
Could be that.
Yeah, could be, but who knows? Anyway, it is bewitching hour. We
All
will
right.
close. Thanks Heidi for helping. Thanks everybody for sharing. And take a look at the screen. This is the hardcore, right? These are the people that care enough about this topic, and we just scratch the surface. Some days we'll talk about power tools, burrs, and things that go bump in the night.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you.